So this is a very quick introduction to the rest of the November wrap-up because the lighting is super weird, the sun's going down. Just wanted to say that I did finish the autumn equinox syllabus this month, so that was really exciting, and I didn't read nearly as many books, I don't think, but other than that, enjoy the video. So I finished 2 books yesterday. The first was for the restoration class again. This time the focus was relocating pain, and the prompt was to read a book in a different spot every time. So that one took me a little longer because I had to find different spots because I mostly just hang out at home in my bed. But yeah, I read in my bed, I read at the park, I read in the backyard, I read... That might have been most of the places. I don't know if I read in the car or not. So, but the book I chose was Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney, and Alice Feeney wrote Daisy Darker, which is possibly my favorite, if not one of my favorite, sort of murder mystery, thriller, not sure what category, probably more murder mystery. And I'm sorry if you can hear the dogs barking, it's just nonstop. But I don't know which order she wrote them in. I definitely preferred Daisy Darker. That one, like I said, it was one of my all-time favorites. Rock, Paper, Scissors was fine. Like, I don't know. I think it just wasn't for me. The characters were definitely like, felt like caricatures, and I mean, Daisy Darker for sure has a lot of, I guess you could say, unrealistic parts, but I think the story was more compelling and interesting, like the plot itself. The twist, I feel like she's really good at writing twists if you don't mind something that's definitely not realistic. Definitely sort of out there. But, so the twist was interesting. I didn't quite like the ending, and yeah, I definitely didn't like any of the characters, which I don't think you're supposed to. I hope that's not a spoiler, but I don't think you're supposed to, but it's still like, can be kind of hard for me to get into books when there's no one I'm really rooting for, and I also wasn't sure if she was going to be like excusing behavior or not, but I don't think she was. So it's about a couple. It's one of those books where it's hard to really say what it's about because you're constantly finding out new stuff, but at the beginning of the story we have a couple who is traveling through a snowstorm basically to this tiny chapel in Scotland, I want to say, because the wife won a raffle for them to stay, sort of like an Airbnb type of thing. And they get there and there's no one there, and you know that they're having marital problems, and this is kind of like their last chance to save their marriage. You're also getting letters from the wife as they're like, from the first time they meet, and by the end of the book it kind of catches up. Each year she writes a letter to him, but she doesn't send it. The man is an aspiring screenwriter, or I guess he is now. He's a screenwriter, but the wife helped him become famous, get to where he is today, but he doesn't know that. There's also another character who is living in this little shack, I guess, near the chapel that they don't know about, but she knows them, and she has some sort of plans, and all 3 of them are alluding to plans that they have, and like, not all of us are gonna come back, you know, so you're like, what's going on? Yeah, and things just get crazier and crazier. I will say, actually, there is one character that I liked, and that was the dog, of course. His name's Bob, and he was very cute. He is a black lab. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that I would recommend it to anybody, unfortunately. I think I gave it 3 stars. And then the other book I read, which is another one that I never thought I would read, but I did, was for astronomy, the Moonsong Ritual. So I had to pick a book with a word in the title that was the same. So I had to look at the last song I had heard and choose a word from that song title and read a book that had that word in it. So for this one, I did use one of my perks because the last song I had listened to at the time was halfway up. Oh, goodness. Oh, you're my phone. I can't look up who it was by. I will post who it was by. But I couldn't find any books that I was interested in reading with those words. And so I used my perk, which was to basically use any book for a prompt, regardless of whether it fits the prompt or not. But I wanted to still try to kind of fit the prompt, so I just, next time I listened to music, the last song I listened to was Love Song by Sarah Bareilles, and so I read The Love Hypothesis, which, if you know me at all, is not my type of book. What happened was, I just don't generally like romance, especially not straight romance. I feel like the male characters are never good enough. And also I don't know, I don't tend to fall for people easily, so I can't relate to a lot of it. And oh god, the sex scenes, I just don't. Yes, my brand of asexuality, I don't like reading about it. So, but then I was watching this lesbian YouTuber and she read this book and she was like, it was actually good. And I was like, wow. Because she was going hard on the other straight romance books she had read. And so I was like, all right, well, maybe. Oh, and also she had mentioned that one of the main characters is on the ace spectrum. So, which no one had ever said. Like, why is no one talking about this? Anyway, so I read it. And I also, this is the only edition, and it is large print, and I had never read a large print before. And so I'm like reading it far away, but I got used to it. So this book is about, it's by Ali Hazelwood. I think it was the first book that she read, or wrote, but she comes from a sciencey background. She has her PhD in neuroscience, and has remained in academia, and this book is all about academia. So the main girl is trying to get her she's in grad school, and she's trying to get into a really good lab that will give her the funding that she needs to pursue her research. And she has a really personal reason for the research she's pursuing, but they don't mention it until later in the book, so I won't explain it. That stuff was definitely interesting, and her friends at the university and seeing the process that they go through, and people, all the talk about working in a lab, and so many science jokes, which was kind of funny, if cheesy, but that was kind of cool. I do appreciate that, because I feel like there aren't a lot of romance books that take place in a lab or have characters that are scientists. So that's, I think, one of the main appeals for this book for a lot of people, if I'm not mistaken. The other thing, the romance plot that's going on, is that at the very beginning of the book, she basically had dated this dude very briefly, didn't work out, she didn't really have feelings for him, and then finds out that her best friend has feelings for him, but her best friend doesn't want to date him because her best friend thinks that the main girl still has feelings for him, even though the main girl is like, no, I don't. And so the main girl is like, the only way that I can get my best friend to date this dude is if I fall for somebody else, or pretend to fall for somebody else. And so she tells the girl that she's on a date, but she's really in the lab. And then her best friend ends up finding her in the lab, and so she kisses the first person she sees, which ends up being the grumpy a-hole. Gosh, what is he? He's like the lead of the labs. He has his doctorate. He's the lead of one of the labs, and he's like one of the most well-known, like, amazing at his job, premier researchers in the country, if not the world. And then they decide to fake date They each have their own reasons, and of course he's actually really nice to her, which is one of the funny things about this book, is that the whole time they're like, it definitely was a tell not show. The whole time they're like, oh, he's such an a-hole, but then he never is. There was like one moment where he's kind of explaining, because basically all his students hate him because he makes them cry because he's so mean about their work. And so there was one moment where he's like defending himself, and in that you could see like how it could come across as a little cold. But then other than that, he was just nice the whole time and not even grumpy. So I don't fully understand the whole grumpy sunshine thing. I didn't feel like he was. I just felt like he was quiet or like deadpan. But anyway, this book was, it was really funny. I felt like so much of it was unrealistic. I mean, the whole fake dating thing, and like, I haven't been to grad school, but I don't know how well it would fly, even if this person isn't like the head of your personal lab. So sketchy. Which they do talk a lot about power dynamics and consent and different stuff, so that's good, but I don't know. I think it's one of those books where you just kind of have to suspend your disbelief, because so much of it is like, also cringy. But I mean, I get why people like it. I think I gave it 3.5. Like, I liked it more than I thought I would, so that's cool. I think I liked it more than a lot of the rom-coms I've read, so that's cool. Yeah, I would say for the most part it was a good time, which is wild. Even though it was, I felt totally unrealistic. Not just with the situation, but how the characters acted and stuff. But two things about this book. One, like I said, the sex scenes, it grossed me out. I don't know why I read it. I should have just skipped it. Not my thing. Luckily, there's really not much. And she actually doesn't identify as ace as far as I understand. She says at one point, like, oh, I thought that maybe I was ace, but I just have to really get to know someone and trust someone before I'm sexually attracted to them, which is the definition of demisexual. Well, I guess to, like, have an emotional bond with somebody. But I guess it doesn't sound like she identifies that way. But, it was cool to have that representation. I wish that it had been more prevalent. I don't know. But obviously everyone's experience is different, and every ace person's experience is different. Her experience is very different from my experience. I don't know that I've really read... I think I've read one book where the person had the same experience as me, but... maybe two. But, so that's totally fine, you know, because there are obviously... I know that there are people that have the same experiences that she has and the same kind of identity and stuff like that. So that is really cool that that was in here. The other thing is that I'm pretty sure it's true, because I've heard so many people say that this book started out as Kylo Ren, Rey from Star Wars fan fiction. And the funny thing is, I wish that I didn't know. Because then I couldn't stop seeing Adam Driver in my head, and I don't think he's attractive, and it was just so awkward. I just felt like in the Star Wars movies, he was so awkward the whole time. And more than anything, that's not even the thing that bothers me. The thing that bothers me is that, and I don't know why, I'm not like the biggest Star Wars fan. I've seen all the movies, and I liked it okay. But the ending of that one trilogy that they're both in, I hated it to my core. I wish it hadn't happened. I wish I could erase it. I wish I was in an alternate universe where it had never happened, because it drove me insane. It is not in line with Rey's character. I don't know if it's in line with his character. He was weird. But it makes no sense. It makes no freaking sense. And I hate that because there is a male character and a female character that sorry, now I'm spoiling it. But I hate that happened. And I don't know why it bothers me so much. I just think it's so unrealistic. Like, well, there's no explanation that I can understand. There's really no explanation that I can understand. And maybe it's because I'm ace. I don't know. But I just hate that was a choice. So The funny thing is, honestly, if that hadn't happened in the movie, maybe I wouldn't even mind as much this being a fan fiction, because things like other books, like, for example, like Harry Potter, where it's like Draco and Hermione or whatever, like, that doesn't even bother me as much because it didn't happen. So, I'm not mad at the author. I just I just have a bone to pick with the movie choice, and I wish I could get Adam Driver's face out of my head. Anyway, rant over. Overall, like I said, this book wasn't bad. It was even kind of good, I will admit. Will I read any of her other books? No, because I heard that they're all kind of the same. And like I said, straight romance, it still really isn't my thing. Also, I don't like that apparently all her male characters are really tall and really big, and that's not my type, so I don't know. It was just very off-putting to me. But not that there's anything wrong with being tall. Anyway, I'm gonna stop. Okay, goodbye. So I just finished The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert, and unfortunately I was disappointed. I'm not gonna lie, there were several times when I thought about DNFing it. Just not... It wasn't bad. I was just bored, which feels terrible to say. I mean, it was like... So the audiobook was like 11 hours or something, and it just felt like the longest 11 hours of my life. It took me several days to listen to it. I haven't been out in the field as much, which is when I usually listen to audiobooks because I'm just walking a lot. But still, I don't know. I don't know what it was about it, because... So it was about... a lot happened, and maybe that is part of it. Like, a lot happened, but then also not a lot happened. The pacing was weird. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So basically, there's this girl who has lived life on the run with her mother. They have this, what she thinks of as bad luck, that follows her around. The girl's grandmother was this famous fairy tale story writer. And for whatever reason, the girl doesn't know, the mom does not talk about the grandmother, doesn't refer to her life growing up in this, like, manor house that was, you know, all mysterious and stuff. Like, the girl has never met her grandmother, never been to this place. They have just sort of lived life on the edges, trying to survive, running from town to town around the U.S. whenever they'll be in maybe an apartment or a motel or car for a little bit, and then something will happen, something bad will happen, and they'll have to leave. So, I don't know, it's like, I feel like I kept thinking whenever a big reveal would happen that meant we were, you know, at least halfway through or almost through, but it didn't. So again, the pacing was kind of weird, so I'm not sure exactly what counts as a spoiler. But it definitely is more of a... There definitely are fantasy elements, fairy tale elements. There's this boy that the girl kind of teams up with, that she meets through school. But yeah, I guess it's kind of like one long adventure. And I don't know, I kind of went through several different theories on why I didn't like it. I thought maybe it was the narrator. Again, like I've said, I'm not always a huge audiobook person, and definitely when I first started listening to the book, I wasn't a huge fan. The reason that I kept with it on audiobook is because it was for my Art of Illusion class, Voice Altering Spells, and the prompt was to read an audiobook. And it was also the only audiobook I had at the time of the books that I wanted to read, so it wasn't like I could switch it out with something else. Excuse me. And I kept thinking like, oh, well, it's really long, but, you know, eventually it'll pick up, or, you know, just enough time will pass that I'll get through it. But, yeah. So I thought maybe it was that. Like halfway through, I thought maybe it was because I didn't like the main character. She's kind of mean. Um, and I really didn't like that. Very angry, which, like I said, I don't really like reading about angry characters, or angry main characters at least. So, yeah, she's kind of mean and unapologetic about it. And I just wasn't really rooting for her. And I wasn't intrigued enough by the mystery somehow, even though on paper it sounds like a really interesting idea. And maybe it's because I had kind of recently read a book to do with fairy tales. Which one was that? That one was, oh gosh, I think it was in my last, like my October video. Of course, now I'm not remembering it, but I remember that I loved it. But yeah, that was that book, unfortunately. Last night I finished Romeo and Julieta by, oh crap, I will put who it's by. I don't have the book with me. And it is a romance, so again, not my genre, even though I feel like I've been reading so much of them lately. The reason I read it at all, and the reason I didn't DNF it, is because it's part of it was the book club pick for the Carlsbad Book Club for this month. And they don't always pick romance. It's often a different genre every month. But I wanted to go to the meeting still, so I read the book. It is a very loose adaptation of Romeo and Juliet in San Diego in the modern day. We have a woman who lives in the Barrio Logan, and she is a chef, and then there's a man who is extremely wealthy because his dad owns this chain of Mexican restaurants that sounds like it's kind of like a Taco Bell, where it's just like definitely not authentic in any way. And they're both Mexican American, but the man definitely struggles to feel quote unquote Mexican enough in his mind, and his father and he as well, they decide to buy the block of restaurants and stores in Barrio Logan where our main girl, where her restaurant is located. But then they end up meeting, and so there's that big conflict, and then there's an even more complicated thing that happened with both of their parents, so there's problems there. But yeah, it was a pretty short book. I liked that they talked about gentrification and culture, and how, like, one thing that they say in the book that I didn't realize, I mean, I don't really know much about San Diego in general, I've never been there, but they were talking about how, like, this barrio, it's a real place, and apparently that's where a lot of Mexican Americans were pushed to during segregation, and so now that that area is becoming seen as cool by, like, the richer white people, they're trying to take it over again and raise rent prices and stuff like that. And so it was interesting from that context, and that I enjoyed, but I felt like this book was just like they're just like immediately sexually attracted to each other, which I can't relate to at all, without even, like, as soon as they meet. I know that I've been told that is a thing that happens with people, so I'm not saying it's unrealistic, but it definitely was not my thing. I will say, I've read worse sex scenes. Like, they were pretty short, they weren't too graphic, so at least there was that. But I don't know, I felt like the characters were, it's like the author tried to make them complicated, but they changed their minds so easily, and the female protagonist especially, I felt like she was too, like, apologetic and understanding of the male protagonist. So Overall, I think I gave it 2.5 stars. Wouldn't really recommend, unfortunately. And I don't think this even fit any of my Aurelian prompts. It was just a random book that I read. This is very strange lighting, so I apologize for that. I don't know what's going on. But it's been a bit because a lot of stuff has happened in my life. We had to move. There were a lot of problems with the new place, but I have the end of my November reading, finally. So, first off, I read Carmilla. Again, I think it was, oh god, LeFou or something, but it'll be on the picture of the book that comes up here. And that was for the Shapeshifting class, Formation Fangs, a book with vampires. So that one is, I believe it's older than Dracula. I don't know if it's the first vampire book written in English or what, but it's a very, very old one, written in the 1800s, I believe. And it's interesting to see some of the similarities with Dracula. And it has gained popularity, I think, at least the idea of it in the queer community. When I was in college, there was a web series called Carmilla that was sort of a modern take on it, very, very loose take. Because in the book, there is a lesbian relationship, kind of. I know some scholars try to say that that's not what was going on, but at least on one side, there's there are definitely sapphic feelings. It's pretty obvious, I don't know, even for back then, I feel like. But basically, it's a short story, and there's this girl who lives in, oh gosh, where does she live? Somewhere in, like, Eastern Europe, I want to say, and they kind of live in this mansion in the middle of nowhere in this castle, and her family ends up, for reasons, taking in this other girl around her age for a few months. And people in the town start dying, and no one knows what's happening, and there are rumors of vampires. The two girls get really close, and it definitely, I think it is interesting because, first of all, it was a really easy read. I enjoyed the reading experience. It didn't really go the way I thought it was going to go. It is definitely, like, you know, a vampire tale, and not like Twilight, where it's like glorifying vampires. Like, this is like, you know, vampires are evil and all this stuff, so that kind of makes sense. But it wasn't like, I guess the sapphic side of it was a little more like, oh, you know, she's got you under a spell, like she's enthralled you kind of thing. So it's not like we're seeing this example of a great lesbian relationship, and also, like I said, I think it might have been a little bit one-sided. So I don't think that it's like necessarily like a great example of sapphic literature, or even that that's kind of what the author was going for, or that he was promoting that at all or anything, but it was a really interesting reading experience. The next book I read, I finished yesterday, was Don't Let the Forest In, and that was actually the last book for my autumn equinox. So I finished it, and it was for Intro to Domestic Creatures Pet Picks. So because I don't have a pet, I watched a video where this girl had her cat choose a random book, and so basically she had the cat choose from 7 different books, so I picked 7 books, and then whichever number the cat picked, that was the one that I had to read for, like, the ones that I had picked. So Don't Let the Forest In was the one that the cat quote-unquote picked. That one was also kind of an interesting, I listened to it on audiobook. I think I liked a lot about it. I gave it 4 stars. Like, I did really like it. It didn't go the way that I thought it was going to go at all. It's like horror, but there are fantasy elements, which is in like the tags, so I don't think that's a spoiler. I didn't know. I thought it was going to be like more like this kid's just mentally ill or something. I don't know. I mean, there definitely is by the end, even. You're still questioning what is real and what's not. But yeah, there was more fantasy than I thought there would be. But so that part I felt kind of like meh about, but I also felt like it didn't necessarily take away from the parts that I enjoyed. So our main character in this goes to a boarding school. He is a senior in high school. And it's always been him and his twin sister and their friend, who is another boy. And there are so many mysteries that you don't really find out until the end. But basically, something happened last year, right before school ended, and so things are weird, and like people keep making allusions to things, but he's our narrator, so like he's not talking about it, or like, well, he's not, I guess he's not, it's kind of third person, but like from his point of view. Either he's not talking about it, or he doesn't remember, but he suffers from severe anxiety and panic attacks, and like social anxiety, so that part I felt like I related to a lot, because I struggled with that also now, but especially in high school. I've gotten a lot better. But he is also asexual, and that was really cool seeing that in a book, because I know I've talked about, it probably seems like I've been talking about a lot of ace books lately, which I think is probably misrepresenting how many are actually out there, but just every time I see or hear about a book that has ace characters, I read it. So, but this one I feel like was the closest out of all the books I've read to like my experience with asexuality, the way that he experiences it, because it talks a lot about like feeling, and again, like there's no one like good or best way or right way to be asexual, and like I think representing all different ways is really great and important, but it was just cool to see the things that I struggled with that he was also struggling with, especially like feelings of like not being able to give somebody everything that they want or need, and feeling guilty and ashamed of that. It's not something that ace people should feel guilty or ashamed about, but unfortunately, because of society and my own internal pressures, it's definitely something I've struggled with. So yeah, I don't know, it was just really cool to read about that. There are other queer characters in the book as well. There's a GSA. So it's interesting too, because there's like that part of it, and then, oh, and he also is in love with the boy best friend. But he thinks that the boy is in love with his twin sister, so there's that. His sister's like been avoiding him all year, and then I don't want to give too much away, but basically like he writes these really dark fantasy stories, and the boy friend draws them, and things seem to, he starts seeing things that are reminiscent of the stories and the drawings, and things just, I mean, they really go off the rails in like the last bit of the book. It just kind of does a whole 180, but it's a slow build up for most of the book. But yeah, I don't know, I liked the characters, I liked the sort of thriller, like mystery aspect of it. Like I said, I liked the representation. I didn't necessarily agree with the decisions that all the characters made, but I think that it was done in a way that wasn't necessarily condoning their decisions, but it's also just kind of like talking about different topics. It's commentary on sexuality and growing up and grief and anxiety and just why this character does the things he does, and how, and different types of relationships, and so I would definitely recommend it. And the last book, so technically I would have one more book for the autumn equinox, but I decided to not finish it. I am going to finish this book eventually. I just kind of wanted to be done with the equinox, and I didn't want to finish this book now. I think I'm just going to read it very, very, very slowly. It's a nonfiction book, and it's called Wolfish by Erica Berry. And it is really interesting. Nonfiction books a lot of times take me longer to get through. This one is... yeah, it's interesting because she's kind of talking about the psychological, especially like people from the US, like US culture, and Americans' relationship to wolves and like fear of wolves. And she's comparing that to her own fears that she developed growing up of like men, as a woman. And yeah, she has anecdotes about her own life and negative interactions she has with men growing up, or scary situations, or even just times that she's afraid, and maybe even the situation ends up being okay, but like because of past experiences she has this fear. And she's just sort of analyzing that and talking about how wolves could be compared to, you know, like the big bad wolf. It's kind of like, you could say it's a wolf, or you could say it's like just this lecherous, scary, evil man in the forest, and that it's like a metaphor for that. This girl is, Little Red Riding Hood, is really innocent, and like because she's not careful, which is also kind of putting the responsibility on her, she ends up suffering for it. So yeah, I haven't gotten super far, so that's kind of what it's been discussing so far, and it's interesting to see where she's going with it, because obviously, yeah, there are a lot of different things at play, and I also wouldn't say, like, I would say that humans' fear of wolves is mostly unfounded, but people's fear of around men is not. Obviously not all men are threatening or are going to do anything, but there are just a lot more cases where people have been, including other men, have been in dangerous situations. And obviously women, people of all genders can be dangerous, but I'll just reference the woman and the bear question. But yeah, so that was it for November, and I'll see you guys at the end of December.